Hello and welcome again to the Libertarian Solution YouTube videocast. I'm Nick Coons, and I wanted to touch a little bit on a subject that's kind of piqued my interest from a discussion I was having with a listener recently. I'm still in the process of having that discussion. It's a very interesting email conversation. But essentially, and it's not something that this is the first time I've ever encountered. I'm sure, as a libertarian, you've had the same type of discussions with other people, and you've come across the same type of response to a lot of different things. And one of the problems that it seems we run into is that we say, well, the government shouldn't do this, the government shouldn't do that, the government shouldn't be involved. The free market can take care of it, the private sector can handle it. And of course, the common response is, well, how? How do you handle this? How do you take care of education? How do you take care of national defense? How do you take care of law enforcement? How do you do roads without the government involvement in it, without the government doing it, if you leave it completely to the free market? And that's an interesting question. I mean, that is one of the things that we focus on the Libertarian Solution, is putting forward solutions, specifically free market solutions to these types of problems. But I want to clarify something that I think is really important, that it should not be a requirement for us to come up with solutions to these problems in order to get the government out of the way, for the market to come up with these solutions. And there's two reasons I think that's true. One, to me, is first, it seems like a contradiction. I mean, one of the reasons that we don't want the government doing these solutions is because we don't believe in central planning. Central planning is not possible. You can't have a small group of people forcefully impose a plan or a will on a large population and expect that it's going to work or come up with the best solution, without corruption or even minimizing corruption. It's not possible. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons that, us libertarians want the government out of these things, is so we can have competing solutions. We can have other ideas pop out, and of course, whichever one's the best rises to the top. So inherent in the question is the acceptance that central planning works. So basically, if the government doesn't do roads or government doesn't do national defense, how would the free market do it? And of course, that's usually the question. And again, implicit in that is the premise that central planning is valid, which it's not. And so the question essentially distills down to, if you don't agree with central planning, then I need for you to centrally plan a solution for me to take the place of central planning. That's a contradiction. So that's one issue. But the second one I think is a bit more important, and that one comes down to more of a moral argument. And I've got a couple of different metaphors or examples we'll use for this. Let's say we've got two people. We'll call one of them Dave and one of them John. So John is walking down the street, and he's got his wallet in his pocket, so he's got some money with him. And Dave decides that he needs a new something, whatever. Maybe it's a new pair of shoes, a new TV, he needs a bite to eat. He needs to help fund his kid's college bank account, whatever it is. So he decided that he needs something. And he's armed, so he goes to John, and he puts a gun to John's head. And he says, "Give me your wallet." So he's mugging him. He's mugging John. We recognize that Dave's a thug, that Dave's a criminal, and that Dave is committing an immoral act, that he's aggressing against John's rights. So what John could do, it's not incumbent upon him to do it, but what he could do is he could say, well, you know what? Instead of taking my wallet, how about if we come up with other ways about how you can get this pair of shoes or get this food or fund your kid's education? Instead of stealing my wallet from me, how about if we come up with alternatives? He could do that. It's not, I don't think it's a requirement. I don't think John needs to provide Dave with a nonviolent solution in order for Dave to put the gun down. It is not, let me just be very clear about this, it is not John's job to solve Dave's problem in order for Dave to put the gun down. Now, if John wants to provide Dave with a solution, he's certainly, possibly able to do that. That's, that's his prerogative if he wants to contribute that. And maybe he will, because he finds it in his self-interest. Maybe Dave says, either give me your wallet or provide me some other way. So maybe it's in John's interest to do it. Maybe he thinks he's going to be free that way. But it's not morally incumbent upon him to do it. If John can't come up with an alternative, that does not justify Dave using violence or threatening violence or putting the gun to John's head. Let me give you another example. In the early 1800s, but when slavery was illegal here in the southern part of the United States, and some cases in the northern part too. But slavery was legal at one point. A lot of people thought that the economy would collapse without slavery. There's no way we can pay people to do this work. picking crops and that sort of thing, because we'd have to build the cost of the labor into the price of the goods, and it'd be too expensive, and everyone would starve, and the whole economy would collapse. We have to have slavery. It's a necessity. Those are the arguments put forward in defense of slavery. So for someone to come along and say, no, slavery needs to be abolished, slavery should be gone, we recognize slavery is a bad, evil thing, it is not incumbent upon them to come up with economic theories about how society can function without slavery. The only thing that they morally need to do in order to rid the world of slavery is to recognize that slavery is wrong, that it's immoral, that it's evil. That's the only thing. That's the only thing that needs to be done, is a recognition of evil in order to abolish it. It's not required for the victim to come up with a solution for his aggressor, for the aggressor to solve the aggressor's problem, in order for the aggressors to stop being an aggressor. I think we recognize that. So, along the same lines, coming up with solutions to problems that we face, whether it's an issue of national security, or of roads, or of water distribution, or of pollution, or anything like that. The government solution is always the violent solution. It's always the gun to the head. I know if people haven't heard that argument before, it might seem a little bit out there. If you're a libertarian and you're familiar with the concept of walking through, then that's fine. There's lots of other podcasts we've done that clarify this, but just briefly for anyone new to this, basically what the government does is they make rules, laws, and then they threaten people with violence in order to comply with those laws. That's really the only thing the government does, only thing they can do. And it's not simple violence like, pay your taxes or we're shooting you. It's pay your taxes or we'll send you a letter, and if you don't respond to the letter, we'll call you, and if you don't respond to the calls, then we're going to sue you, and if you don't show up at court, we're going to send someone to your house who has a gun or a taser or a club, and he's going to take you in, and if you resist him like you would any other home invader, then he's going to physically knock you out, or stun you, or shoot you, or do whatever he has to do in order to get you to comply. That's kind of how it works. Of course, it's wrapped in a lot of euphemisms and complexities, but essentially what it is you do what the government says, or they're going to use violence against you. That's ultimately what it comes down to. So the government solution, the state solution, is always the violent solution. And in order to say we don't want the government solution, it is not incumbent upon us to say, here is an alternative, here is a non-violent solution. Now, again, it's interesting to do that, it's fun to do that, but it is not a requirement to do that. It's not required that we provide the non-violent solution, the one that doesn't infringe on our rights, in order to get people to stop infringing on our rights from a moral perspective. I have no problem with going through and putting together free market solutions to different problems. I work on it all the time. I've come up with a lot of different solutions that I think are pretty viable. We talk about them on the show all the time. So I definitely have a lot of fun with it, but I think the biggest thing that we can do is to point out the gun in the room. That's a phrase from Stephen Molyneux. I think he coined that one, the gun in the room, which is essentially that the state solution is always the violent solution, and to make it so that people understand that that's what that is. If people don't recognize that the state solution is violence, then there's no reason for them to look at alternatives. There's no reason to accept the alternative. There's no reason for them to say, well, if you want me to take the gun away, then provide me with an alternative, because they don't recognize the guns there. They don't recognize the violence inherent in the solution that they're proposing, the state-based solution. So it's important to point that out, to focus on that. The market will come up with all sorts of solutions. Really intelligent people who are looking for their own self-interest will come up with solutions to problems, because they're going to make lots of money by solving problems that people have. So that's ultimately what's going to happen with the market side of things, the private sector, and I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. If any one person or even any group of people could know what that's going to look like, well, then we'd have an argument for government, and of course that's never worked. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you have any questions or anything that you'd like addressed specifically, please feel free to send us an email. Don't forget to check out the Facebook fan page to stay up to date with things. Sign up for the newsletter, and of course, as always, tune into the show. Thanks so much for tuning in.